my third point was reforming education. And this obviously is a holy grail. Everyone wants to drive up education standards, and it is of course important to raise education standards across the board. But I think what government has been missing is that the highest priority for driving economic prosperity is the top tier of outstanding achievers. The reality is that breakthroughs in most fields, whether it's science, arts, or commerce, come from the genius of a small group of leaders, not the mass efforts of a collection of modest achievers. It's the few who create the spark, whether they're the Barnes Wallaces of the world or the the entrepreneurs that lift everyone up. And indeed, studies of productivity and changes in different countries suggest that the biggest factor is the quality of the business leadership, not the average education of the workforce. Good management can create world-beating facilities almost everywhere. So I think we should rejoice in excellence and give everyone the opportunity so that high ability young people can get the best education regardless of their social background. Simple idea, seems fairly straightforward. The trouble is that I fear education policy in the UK over the last 50 years has gone exactly in the opposite direction. We've destroyed high achieving academic schools, open on merit to everyone with the talent, called grammar schools. We made top class education the preserve of the rich, who can pay for private education or afford to live in the right postcode. And the high potential child from a poor family who happens to live in a poor area where the standards are low and the aspirations of his peer group are low, is now left with no route to the top. He has no alternative but to go to his local school and be dumbed down. We've torn away the ladders that those children of ability used to have to reach the top of their potential and the top of society. And we're wasting a huge amount of national talent. You only have to look around most rooms at today's leaders, at the number who came up through grammar schools, and compare that now with the dominance of private pupils now merging the top universities and professions, which is over 50% in many areas, despite the fact they're only 7% of the population. And of the remaining 50%, a large proportion are remaining grammar school pupils, even though there's only 10% of the country that still has grammar schools. The comprehensives, despite there are some excellent comprehensives, but they are failing on the whole to deliver high quality pupils into those top echelons. So I'm not suggesting a return to a compulsory 11 plus or a return to the old grammar school regime, but I do think sooner or later we have to re-embrace the idea that we need excellence in education and that we should reintroduce high-performing selective schools in the state sector with a wide catchment area which are open for anyone who wants to apply and can earn a place on merit. And I'm banging my head continually against the politically correct stance that says no, that's not the way. The best way is to force university to take less qualified students and bus people around. I don't think that's the solution. I think we need to give high ability children the best quality education, give them the confidence to reach the top. If we're going to have the leadership in this country we need over the next 50 years, and you only have to look at what's going on in India or China or somewhere to realise that they don't have any of our difficulties in embracing that concept. Fourth point, and I realise I'm going on here, but I'll try and be brief. Promoting exports of high-value services. Clearly, if we're going to grow, we have to find things where we have a comparative advantage, using our labour force to create value that we can trade with fast-growing emerging markets. And I think that's more likely to be value from exporting brain hours than brawn or manufacturing hours, unless they're based on an IP advantage. Which brings us to services. Financial services is clearly one area. Media is another area where the UK has huge potential. But two neglected areas, I think, are education and health, because the public sector domination means we've not managed them as wealth-creating industries. There's a huge potential for the education industry in the UK. given the importance of English around the world, given the quality of our reputation around the world, to be a global centre for education. We need to free up the universities to fund massive expansion aimed at attracting foreign students, where the income they bring is not just paying the wages of lecturers, but the whole support infrastructure and accommodation that goes around them. We should be marketing and make it easier for foreign students to see the UK as their location of preference, making it easier for them to get visas as opposed to going the other direction. Similarly, health, where top hospitals can and should become global centres for healthcare, as in the US. Education and health together are 15% of our GDP. We need to stop thinking of them as a drag, as costly domestic services, and thinking of them as a growing and expanding future wealth-creating industry where we can trade on favourable terms with the rest of the world. And I think the government is still not grasping that concept. And finally, low-cost energy, and given Joe is here, I'll defer all questions on this to him, but despite best intentions, we're not going to become less energy dependent as an economy. Energy will continue to be the most important underlying cost in our economy. But the issue isn't just about cost, it's also about security, and as we all know, we're now heavily dependent on gas, where the pricing is volatile, we're dependent on stable parts of the world, and we have, unlike some other countries, little storage. This isn't the time or place for long debate about the virtues of various other renewables, but in my view, wind is not the answer, although it may be part of the answer. It is costly and it is unreliable. And I think the only near-term answer, like it or not, is nuclear. And it's worth noting the average unit cost for electricity for the industrial use in the UK in 2009 was 8.4p. In France, which is 80% nuclear, it was 6.15p. I suspect, given what's happened to the oil and gas price since then, that difference has widened considerably and has much more stability. So despite what's happened in Japan, I think we need to take some reassurance in the safety lessons that have been learned, and also the fact that nuclear fuel comes from countries like Canada and Australia, as well as some less favourable places, but there are enough sources that we can count on a friendly supply chain rather than being dependent on places around the world which are less stable and less predictable. So, as I said, I wanted to be a bit controversial, but those are my key priorities. You may agree or disagree. I could have added a long list of other things that are part of the growth agenda. The whole small business agenda, which I know many of you are rightly concerned about, deregulation, lower taxes, support for research spending, infrastructure, etc., etc. My key point is that to be effective, government needs to adopt a much more methodical, strategic approach to analysing the issues in the way that we in business would, coming out with what it thinks are the key things which are going to drive value, and then stick to its plan. And the only thing that gets in the way of that is politics. But it is, I think, in all our interests to encourage governments to take a long-term strategic approach. And I think if we're going to survive and prosper and grow in the way we have the potential to do, it's essential that we have government that takes that long-term view as opposed to managing for tomorrow's headlines. So I'm happy to answer questions about any of that. I'm happy to talk about anything else you want to talk about, or tell you what it was like working with Margaret Thatcher, but that's probably enough to get you going.